If you notice on the cover of your bulletin, there's a paraphrase of Ecclesiastes, the first couple of verses, and it's very brief. Trust God and take the risk. That's essentially what he says in the first two verses, and it's kind of the theme of this whole 11th chapter. And he says we're going to live in a world of uncertainty, and so there's going to be a certain amount of risk that we're going to have to face, whether we like it or not. In fact, if you look at verses 2 through 6, you'll find the expression, "you do not know," repeated 4 times. There are a lot of things that we don't know, a lot of things we don't understand, mysteries. We can try to master life and bring everything under our control, or we can be content, as I think the wise man here eventually came to the conclusion, that I will live with the mystery. There are certain things that I don't understand, perhaps never will understand, but I trust God who does understand, and that I know He is in control, and I can enjoy. That's what we talked about last week. He says, despite coming to all of these dead ends where it looked like it was meaningless and vanity, I've learned to enjoy the simple things of life. The everyday things of life, like my work, I spend a lot of time there. Like my spouse, spend a lot of time with that spouse. And like good food. And I like to savor the moment of good food. Amen. And yes, we have the brother who's got his priorities straight here. If we're not enjoying those things, the everyday things where we spend most of our life, we're missing out. And the wise man says, enjoy. Today he's going to say, launch out. Take a risk. In fact, you'll notice the verses of the first 10 verses. Well, there's only 10 verses in Ecclesiastes 11, but those are on your outline at the bottom of the fill in the blanks. The first verse, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Now that sounds a little bit strange. Who's going to throw bread in the water? What will that get you if you happen to do that? When was the last time you threw your bread on the waters? That gets you soggy bread. Well, there was a proverb that was going around about this time that was similar to this, and it said it'll return to you dry and edible. In other words, if you take a risk and you launch out, it may not look like it's going to be fruitful, but you will be blessed because you've taken the risk. Now, the wise man says there are some risks that we need to take for our God if we trust. That's really the whole question here. Do we trust God and that He is in control, even when we make decisions that we're not fully confident in, but instead of being paralyzed by fear or trying to find out all of the circumstances that might happen, we go ahead, we make a decision, and we cast our bread on the waters. Now, some translations say here about, they take that to mean trade, do worldwide trade. Trade there and trade over here. But I think what he's talking about is something else. Point number 1 on your outline here is he wants us to be generous. Take risk by being generous. Share your bread with others. Throw it out there and let's see what God returns when you've shared your bread in this seemingly insignificant or meaningless way. It may come back to you. Generosity always pays. Mark Batterson, we have the article by him in the bulletin, said that this chapter of Ecclesiastes 11 was apparently written for him because he's a perfectionist and he doesn't like to do things and make decisions until every detail is tied up. Now, there's a difference in living for excellence and doing things in an excellent way and refusing to do anything until everything is just perfect. That's what the wise man is trying to get us away from. Do a good job, do things excellently, but don't let fear of this may not work out if all the pieces of the puzzle aren't in place. Launch out at some point and do it. If you'll notice there in your bulletin, toward the end of that article that's entitled The Uncertainty Principle, Batterson says that God is predictably unpredictable. That's part of our sign message on the east side of the sign today. You can't read the Bible and come to any other conclusion. God loves to surprise us. Have you ever read a passage of Scripture that you felt was exclusively written for you? That's how I feel about Ecclesiastes 11. I'm a recovering perfectionist. I have a hard time tying off the umbilical cord on anything. Ecclesiastes 11 is the prescription for perfectionism. Verse 1 says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it again. There is a time to be cautious and a time to throw caution to the wind. There is a time to test the waters and a time to cast your bread upon the waters." Verse 4 says, "Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap." In other words, if you wait for perfect conditions, you'll be waiting till the day you die. It's the uncertainty principle. We live in an uncertain world. We're not sure why or how all things happen. And so he says at some point you have to make a decision and launch out and take a risk, knowing that you can trust God as you go through that particular process. Nadine Stair, who's passed on, you may remember this from a number of years ago. Someone asked her when she was 85, if you had your life to live differently, if you had it to live over again, would you do it differently? And she said, "If I had my life to live over again, I dare to make more mistakes next time. I dare to make more mistakes. I'd relax. I'd limber up." Now, this is someone who's 85. "I'd be sillier than I've been this trip." Now, some of us may need to tone it down, but she said, "I'd be sillier the next go-around. I would take fewer things seriously. I would take more chances. I would eat more ice cream and less beans." Come on, number 9 here. We got an amen from George here, but more ice cream, less beans. If I'm more steak, yes. If I'm conscious on the last day I live, I would love to finish off with a half gallon of vanilla bean ice cream. The last thing I want to do is die healthy. I want to go out, on a worthwhile note. Well, he was kind of sick, but boy, he had a good time with that ice cream. That was the last thing that he did. And then he looked at you and he smiled and said, "The Lord bless, and we'll see you later." Well, Nadine Stair beat me to the punch. She would go with that ice cream. I would perhaps have more actual troubles, but fewer imaginary ones. You see, I'm one of those people who was sensible and sane, hour after hour, day after day. Oh, I've had my moments. And if I had it to do over again, I'd have more of them. In fact, I'd try to have nothing else, just moments, one after another, instead of living so many years ahead of each day. I've been one of those persons who never goes anywhere without a thermometer, a hot water bottle, a raincoat, and a parachute. Remember that when you go to Texas. If I could do it again, I would travel lighter than I have. If I had to live my life over, I would start barefoot earlier in the spring and stay that way later in the fall. I think you've heard me say my grandmother said the rule in their house in Arkansas when she was a little girl, you could not go barefoot until May. Didn't matter how hot April was, but you couldn't go barefoot until the 1st of May. Now, why they decided that, I am not sure. But as a little girl, she wanted to launch out and take the risk. And barefoot sooner than that if she could, but it didn't happen. She said I would start earlier, stay later in the fall. I would go to more dances. I would ride more merry-go-rounds. I would pick more daisies. What would you do differently if you had it to do over again? Would you take more risk and be less calculated? Would you continue to wait for everything has to be just right before we decide, before we do? Now, granted, there's some kind of balancing that needs to go on here between being too spontaneous and being too overly serious about making a final decision. But the wise man is saying we need to think about that other option here of taking risks by being generous. And we can be generous in a number of ways. That leads us into point number 2 here. As he encourages us to give freely and become more wealthy, be stingy and lose everything. He says if you're not going to take this risk and be generous, you're probably going to lose whatever you think you've got. But if you're generous and you cast your bread on the waters, he says, let me encourage you to diversify your investments. And that's verse 2. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster might happen on the earth. Don't put all your eggs in one basket is what we say. Diversify. Try 7, try 8, different portions of this or that, and something is probably going to pan out. Now, a lot of people go into the stock market or into some kind of financial planning that way. They have the risky, high risk but high paying stocks they can invest in, and then they also have the low risk, low interest. Of course, these days most everything is low interest, but we have those options of getting in the mix there. But it's not just money. We need to be generous in investing in other ways as well. Sometimes we need to invest time with someone else and take a risk. Spend some time with this individual. Spend extra time, more than what you had planned on. And it might make a difference in that individual's life if you are generous in sowing the seed of extra time or mentoring someone or comforting them in their loss. Unexpectedly being called into a situation, but you have the time, you're not in a hurry. And you lend a word of encouragement and you invest that way. You may be putting something in our Bible box, and we send out contributions to different parts of the world for Bibles. You'll never know until the other side how that investment paid off. But diversify. Want to be great on the other side, to have someone meet and greet you and say, I never knew who provided this Bible, but it is what brought me to Christ. Thank you for your role in it. He says, if you sow in a diverse way, you may be surprised at what you reap. How about Wednesday night? Lots of visitors are showing up on Wednesday night. And a lot of little kids. Would you like to be a part of that teaching program then? Would you like to be involved in the dessert or the meal once a month? Make an investment there. Cast your bread. Take a risk. They may not like what I cook. Well, enjoy it, Anyway. Don't be afraid. Don't let fear cause you to make a good decision to invest. Opening your home, having people in, can be a good investment and one way of casting your bread out on the waters. Inviting others to church. Now, we can also sow stuff that's negative. If we sow negativity, we're going to reap some kind of bad harvest. As we sow, we'll reap. If we sow gossip, then it'll eventually come back in a bad way and cause a lot of harm or dishonesty. We can sow bad stuff as well as good, but he says diversify with good stuff in your investments. Number 3, accept what is real instead of waiting for what's ideal. Look at the world as it really is. Look at your situation as it really is. Oh, I wish this were different. Well, maybe a lot of things we wish were different. But instead of waiting for that ideal time, verses 3 and 4 says, if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. He says that's just the way it is. You see a rain cloud and it's got rain in there. At some point, you're going to get rain, whether you want it or not. And of course, we want it. He goes on, if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. So if you're crossing out through the woods and you come to a tree that's been felled by a woodsman or just by lightning or just by old age, deal with it. And say, boy, I wish that tree wasn't here. Use it as part of the plan. What are you going to do since that is there? I wish my circumstances were not like this. There's a tree that's fallen into my sphere, and I wish that weren't the case. But he says it's there. Some things are real, and you have to deal with the reality rather than waiting for an ideal time and situation. And then he goes on to say, the one who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. Now, the first place I preached in Texas and on a full-time basis, a little town called Trent, I would watch those farmers. And you talk about trusting God and taking the risk. They did. They don't have the irrigation system that California does. And so they would go ahead and at some point they would plant the seed, but then maybe a huge rain would come in and wash out what they'd done. They'd have to redo that. And then maybe they planted the seed and the rains came just at a great time and the harvest looked good. The maize was out there and the crop was going to be a good crop. Come September, you'd have this horrendous hailstorm and just wipe everything out. You might say, well, I don't want to do that. I'm not even going to plant. And the wise man says, take the risk. Trust God. Plan for disaster in there. Make that part of your plan. Bessie Bradley said that they planned for a bad winter every 5 years. That was part of the way they planned. And so they would sock away a little extra for that bad time, but it didn't keep them from saying, let's get out of the orange and citrus business. No, they launched out and trusted God, and they were blessed in many ways. We may be saving money for a rainy day, which is fine, but we can go to the extreme on that, can we not? Jesus said, here's the man who filled his barns. He had so much that he didn't know what to do with it, so he built greater barns. And he says, foolish man, tonight you'll lose your life because you've not been rich toward God. You've not been generous. You've not been throwing some of that bread around for the benefit of others. Number 4. As a kind of a tie-up for that last point, Paul says we need to preach the word in season and out of season. Proclaim the message. Be persistent whether the time is favorable or unfavorable. The conditions may look just right, but he says our job is to proclaim the message all the time. There's an interesting passage where Jesus told the parable of the sower, and he said it's like a sower who went forth to sow and he scattered seed. He just scattered it indiscriminately. Some of it fell on the hard pan, on the path. Very little chance of it doing anything unless a bird came along and picked up one of those seeds and dropped it over there in some good soil. Don't discriminate. Share the good news. Share the word. Be that sower who scatters the seed. And you're thinking, this is not going to do any good. This guy's a knucklehead. This guy is resistant. This guy is not going to listen. Sow the seed. A little bird may help you and plant it where it's productive. Okay? Number 4, keep sowing good seed or good even if your understanding is so-so. Keep sowing if your understanding is so-so. I don't understand all I know about this. Well, who does? We don't know what kind of harvest, how good the production is going to be, but we keep sowing the seed. I like Psalm 126. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. He says, you may go out weeping, you may go out with a heavy heart, sowing the seed. Says eventually you'll come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. We have a song, one of those old songs that goes this way. Sowing in the morning, sowing seeds of kindness, sowing in the noontide and the dewy eve, waiting for the harvest and the time of reaping. We shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves. Sowing in the sunshine, sowing in the shadows, fearing neither clouds nor winter's chilling breeze. But by and by the harvest and the labor ended, we shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves. Going forth with weeping, sowing for the master, though the loss sustained our spirits often grieves. When our weeping's over, he will bid us welcome. We shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves. The Lord promises that if we'll sow, and if we'll cultivate, and if we'll water, he'll give the growth. He'll give his blessing. Verses 5 and 6 on your outline. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with a child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. He says, you don't know how God puts his Spirit in that little baby in the womb. You don't know how or when that happens, but you know it happens. And you don't have to understand all that's going on there to be a father or to be a mother of a little one who's born through that natural process that God blesses. Jesus may have had Ecclesiastes 11 in mind when he said to Nicodemus, you have to be born again. And he thought he meant going back to the beginning with his mother. No, this is being born from above, born of water and the Spirit. And he says the wind, and the word for wind is the same word for spirit. The wind goes where it wills, and you can't see it, but you know it's active because you see the results of it. And you don't know what God is up to when he sends his wind or breathes his Spirit into that little human developing within inside a woman. You don't understand that. You don't know how and when that happens. But you know God is at work. And so he says, even when you don't understand, go out there and do good and sow, and God will bless. Number 5, enjoy working in the dark. Verses 7 and 8 on your outline, light is sweet and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. We're not sure exactly what he means here when he talks about the days of darkness. He might be talking about when one is under the ground, in the tomb, and everything is totally dark. Or he might be talking about old age, when we experience more difficulties and more dark days that we'll get into when we look at chapter 12 during the class time. He says, enjoy it. Enjoy even in light of the difficulties that are out there or that you may be going through even right now. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 17, Paul said, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. He wants us to enjoy what he gives us, not only monetarily, but the gifts that he gives us. He wants us to embrace them and enjoy them and use them and cast them about, share them freely with others. Lou Gehrig, July 4th, 1939, said some remarkable things. He was retiring from baseball. He was known at one time as the Iron Man because of all the consecutive games. He just didn't miss games. But he contracted this debilitating disease that was named after him, Lou Gehrig's disease. And I had personal contact with that when I was in Ripon, California. There was an individual there who had Lou Gehrig's disease. And he got to the point to where he would lie there in his recliner with his Bible on his chest, and his wife would have to turn the pages for him. He couldn't do that. And many of the folks who have Lou Gehrig's disease, because of the atrophy of the muscles, choke to death, even on water. And Jim eventually died. It's an ugly disease. You don't want to have a disease named after you. We call it Lou Gehrig's disease because the initials ALS stand for 3 words that are too difficult to pronounce. But Lou Gehrig retiring, knowing that he had this disease. On July 4th, was in Yankee Stadium, and he thanked everyone who had made his playing days with the Yankees so wonderful. He thanked the fans, the groundskeepers, the vendors, the ticket takers, his manager, his teammates, his parents, and especially his wife. He thanked everyone who made his job possible. And then he concluded his remarks by saying, I'm the luckiest man alive. And that's what the wise man is saying. When you see the darkness enveloping, when you're going through the valley of the shadow, give thanks. Don't forget to enjoy, even as God leads you through those difficult times. And then finally here, start early. Verses 9 and 10, rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. He says, start young. Enjoy your youth. Let the light of your eyes, the dreams, let them take place. Enjoy. You're only going to be young and healthy, and everything is working the way it's supposed to work for a short period of time. I won't tell you just what age it gets out of hand, but at some point along the line before you get out of bed, you kind of do a quick check, and then you put one foot on the floor, and then you follow it with another foot. You don't just bounce out of bed. You've learned better than that. There's coming a time, he says, regardless of how long you live, that some of those dark days are going to come. So take advantage, full advantage of while you're younger. And don't let vexation be a part of who you are. Vexation has to do with anger. It has to do with resentment. Don't let that get a hold. Sometimes we hear about the angry young man, and preachers go through this too. We ought to be doing this. We're not doing that. The angry young preacher, over time he mellows because he learns that people are just like him, and they've got their problems just like he does. And that anger is tempered. But the wise man is saying, enjoy. I know you're young. I know you know the solutions to the world's problems. I know it looks easy to you, but reality will set in on you too, young people. Okay? Where you'll have more questions than you have answers. That day's coming. And Lord, hasten the day. But he says, enjoy that youth. And launch out and follow your dreams. Do things. I'm so grateful that I had a friend, Charlie Middlebrook, who's dealing with his own cancer now in Houston, Texas. But he would say to me, just kind of jokingly, let's go to Africa. Okay, Charlie, when you want to go? Well, let's just pick a date and go. Let's go to Africa. Yeah. And one day it got serious. Let's go to Africa. Okay. What are we going to do? Well, there's this mission over there, Noe Mission, and you know a couple of the guys who've been over there, and we could use that as the stopping place, but we could visit all these other places in Africa. And let me say to the young people, let me say to any young people, if you want to go on a mission trip, I don't care if it's a week, I don't care, as in my case, it's 6 months, I'll help get you out of the country, if I can. The time to travel, the time to cast your bread out there and just take a risk and say, okay, may come back with malaria, may come back with bilharzia, which was kind of an African problem. Didn't come back with either one of them. But you may come back with so much more than you would ever hope to come back with, so much more good. It was a great time. We landed in Uganda, we went down to Kenya, to Tanzania, to Malawi, to what was then called Rhodesia, now it's Zimbabwe. And that was my stopping place because that's where Noe Mission was, and Charlie cast his bread on toward Swaziland, and he taught in the school down there, and I taught in the school there at Noe Mission. One of the best times of my life. Do it while you're young. Do it while you're single. You get married, it's a little tougher. You get kids, it's really tough to do that. The little Maddoxes of this world call the shots when they show up, right? And you don't do anything without checking with Maddox first. Okay? So while you're young, this is what the wise man is saying. Follow your dreams. Experiment. And I wasn't that interested in Africa until I got there. And then you start reading all this stuff that you want to know about because this is where you live. It's a great education. There's nothing that will add to your education like travel. And I'm grateful that Pepperdine has all of these campuses, and Cannon went down to Argentina. Great place to brush up on your Spanish. Heidelberg, Germany, London, England, different places in the world. Dream. Launch out. The wise man says, yes, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how productive this planting or this sowing will be or that one, but they might all be good. Trust God, think it through, and launch out. We need to get past our fears, past ourselves, and trust God. If you need to respond, will you do that while we stand, while we sing?